Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're learning Mishna Yoma, Parak Dal, Chapter 4, Mishnah Vav, Mishnah 6. B'chol Yom, every day, meaning any other day of the year, Hayusham Arba Maroches. There were 4 pyres. How do you explain a pyre? A pile of wood, right?
Yeah, it's like it's a big pile.
It's a large pile of. In this case, it's a large pile. We're taught pyres are a large pile of wood. There are 4 maroches, 4 pyres.
Maracos, like they're gonna win.
All right. There were 4 maroches. 4 maroches. There were 4 pyres on the Mizbeach we're talking about. V'hayom chamesh. But today on Yom Kippur there were 5. They were remered through the words of Reb Meir. So we have to explain why are there 4 pyres during the rest of the year, and what was the 5th one on Yom Kippur. The explanation is like this: pyre number 1, which was called the Marach HaGedolah, the large pyre, one on which the tamid and other offerings were burnt. You needed a pyre, you needed an area on the Mizbeach where you burnt the sacrifices. So there was this large pyre of wood upon which the pieces of the sacrifice that were burned were split upon. So you had 1 pyre that was there for burning the sacrifices. Number 2, one from which coals were taken to burn the daily ketores. The daily incense was burned on these embers, or these hot coals that came from the wood, and you used to take from there to burn the incense on. There was a special pyre just for that, to take coals from which to burn the daily ketores, daily incense. Number 3, one on which a fire burned constantly. The Torah says there should constantly be a fire burning on the Mizbeach. So they had a special fire just for the purpose of burning on the Mizbeach. Number 4, one on which they burnt the limbs and fats of the previous day's offerings that had not finished burning the night before. Meaning, you had a sacrifice. Any sacrifice had to be brought by day. After it was brought, meaning it went through slaughtering, catching the blood, bringing the blood to the altar, throwing the blood on the walls of the Mizbeach of the altar, then you got to burn certain parts. Now, those parts could be burnt that day itself. They could be burned the night after. And sometimes there was such a backlog of animal parts that had to be burnt that certain parts didn't even get burned that night. So they were burned the next day on this special pyre. There's a special pyre of wood, a special fire for the purposes of burning those parts of the sacrifice that couldn't have been born, that were not burned, that were not able to be burned the night before. Okay. Then the Mishnah says, "Vayayim chamesh." On Yom Kippur, there's a 5th. What's the 5th one for? It was lit to provide the coals needed to burn the ketores inside the Holy of Holies. The special burning of the ketores that was on Yom Kippur in the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, the coal for that had its own pyre. So therefore, that's Reb Meir's opinion of 4 during the rest of the year and 5 in Yom Kippur. Rabbi Yossi says, "B'chol yom shalish." Every day there were 3. V'hayom arba, and on Yom Kippur there was 4. Okay, so which one does Rabbi Yossi leave out? So the Bartanura says, according to Rabbi Yossi, there was no separate pyre on which to burn the limbs and fats of the previous day's offerings. You didn't have that. You didn't have that fire just for that. So what did they do with those limbs? What did they do with it? It wasn't burned the night before. Where was it burned, if not on its own pyre? And the answer is, these limbs and fats were simply moved to the outer. They were moved to the outer edges of the great pyre. Meaning, I guess you had the pyre upon which the sacrifices were brought, and they describe something called the outer edges of that pyre, and that's where they burnt those limbs. It was not put on the. It wasn't put. Basically, I have another exercise to explain it, but it wasn't put in the pyre like those days' sacrifices, starting from that day's daily morning sacrifice. It was burned. Those ones from the previous that were for the previous night. They call it moved to the outer edges of the great pyre, which is where they were burned. Outer edges of that pyre. Rabbi Yehuda says, "B'chol yom shtayim, v'yom shalish." Rabbi Yehuda says every day there were 2, and Yom Kippur there was 3. So which one does Rabbi Yehuda leave out? Rabbi Yehuda leaves out the separate pyre on which to burn. I'm sorry. According to Yehuda, the one again, it's according to Yehuda, it's two. That means there's no special pyre to burn the previous day's parts, and nor was there one on which a fire burnt constantly. This pyre for just having a constant fire on it, Yehuda did not hold of that. Each one of these Tanoim, they take the words of a verse. They all differ on how to interpret or how to derive from the words of the Torah how many there were. There's a certain verse by which there's a discussion of burning the sacrifices. There's a verses that deal with the fire on the altar, and each one kind of interprets and derives from those words of the Torah their opinion. But the final opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is that there were only two, which basically means you had the Arach Gedolah, the great pyre, then you had the pyre from which to take the coals for the burning of the Ketores. And Yom Kippur, you had a third one to burn the Ketores in the Holy of Holies, but in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But the other two, which were just have a constant fire or to burn those parts that weren't burned from the previous night, there was no special pyre for that. Here, the Bar Tanura speaks out, Halacha Reb Yosi, the father opinion of Reb Yosi, which was every day 3 and Yom Kippur 4. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome, Martin.